The greenhouse stood at the far corner of the lot, forgotten among the sprawling items at the estate sale. Its glass panes, fogged with dirt and age, barely revealed the tangle of dead plants and vines inside. The man, a solitary figure with little more than an overgrown backyard to his name, saw potential in the structure. He struck a deal and had it hauled to his property the following day. The greenhouse settled awkwardly into his yard, a blemish on the wild chaos of his untended land. He spent the first week cleaning it out, peeling dead vines from the walls, shoveling out soil clumped with old roots, and scrubbing the glass until sunlight streamed through like golden fingers. He began planting, a collection of seeds, some bought, some gifted, filled trays and pots with the promise of new life. Tomatoes, basil, daisies and succulents. His work was meticulous. Gardening was his escape, his way of bending life to his will. At first the plants grew normally. Green sprouts pushed through the soil, stretching toward the sun. But within a week, he noticed peculiarities. The tomato plants were vibrant, their stems unusually thick, their leaves almost waxy. The daisies bloomed early, their petals stark white but tinged with a faint, unnatural green. Even the basil, normally fragrant and soft, developed leaves that were coarse and sharp-edged. The changes didn't alarm him at first. He chalked it up to the unique conditions of the greenhouse, the perfect balance of warmth, humidity and light. But the plants didn't stop evolving. By the second week, the tomatoes grew bulbous and glossy, but their skin had a translucent quality, revealing pulsing veins beneath. The daisies began to curl inward at night, their stems swaying as if disturbed by an unseen wind. The basil emitted a strange metallic scent that lingered in the humid air. It was during this time that the man began to feel uneasy. At night, when the house was silent, he thought he heard rustling coming from the greenhouse, a faint creaking like the groan of shifting wood. He told himself it was the sound of the glass settling or the wind passing through unseen cracks. One morning, he stepped into the greenhouse to find an unfamiliar plant. It had sprouted in the center of the floor, where no pot or soil should have supported growth. Its stem was pale, almost flesh-like, and its leaves were wide and dark, mottled with streaks of purple and black. The plant seemed to tremble under his gaze. He tried to uproot it. His hands gripped its base, but the stem was unyielding. When he pulled harder, the plant emitted a sharp, almost animalistic squeal. Startled, he stumbled back, his hands slick with a viscous green fluid that oozed from the plant's stem. The fluid stung his skin, leaving faint red welts. From that day, the greenhouse took on a life of its own. The plants grew at an unnatural pace, their leaves pressing against the glass walls, their roots snaking out of pots and into the cracks of the floor. The air inside became oppressive, heavy with the acrid scent of rot and decay. He tried to contain the growth. He pruned aggressively, cutting back the vines that crept along the walls and ceiling. But every cut seemed to invigorate the plants. They regrew overnight, thicker and more twisted than before. By the third week, the greenhouse was unrecognizable. The walls were obscured by a pulsating web of vines and leaves. Strange pods hung from the ceiling, their surfaces glistening with moisture. Some of the pods bulged as if something moved inside. The man began to feel watched. He avoided the greenhouse, but its presence loomed at the edge of his vision, an ominous shadow on the horizon of his yard. At night, the rustling grew louder, punctuated by wet, slithering sounds. One morning, he awoke to find his yard transformed. Vines had spilled out of the greenhouse and crept toward the house. Thick tendrils wrapped around his porch, and small barbed shoots had begun to penetrate the wood of his walls. Panicked, he grabbed an axe and headed to the greenhouse. The inside was a nightmare. The plants had completely overtaken the space, their forms unrecognizable. The translucent tomatoes now hung in clusters, their interiors writhing with shadowy figures. The daisies swayed violently as he approached, their stems bending toward him like a predator eyeing its prey. The pale, flesh-like plant in the center had grown taller, its stem branching out into grotesque appendages. As he raised the axe, the greenhouse came alive. Vines shot out, wrapping around his arms and legs, pulling him to the ground. The air filled with a high-pitched wail as the plants convulsed and tightened their grip. The pods hanging from the ceiling began to split open, releasing a torrent of thick green liquid and dozens of small, wriggling creatures. He struggled, but the vines were unrelenting. They dragged him toward the center of the greenhouse, toward the pale plant that now loomed over him, its appendages reaching out like welcoming arms. The last thing he saw before the vines enveloped his face was the plant opening at its base, revealing a gaping, tooth-lined maw. Days later, the greenhouse stood silent once more, its glass panes opaque with condensation. Inside, the plants thrived, vibrant and alive, their roots spreading deep into the earth. In the center, the pale plant stood taller than ever, a faint, human-like silhouette visible within its translucent stem. The estate sale had ended, but the greenhouse would remain, waiting, growing.